He told his boys it was just a test. That is how he tried to explain the distance, the delayed replies, the silence, and the sudden change in his energy. He said he only wanted to see what you would do. Would you chase him? Would you panic? Would you compete for his attention? Would you abandon your standards just to prove that you cared? But here is what he did not expect. You did not perform for him. You did not beg. You did not fight for access to someone who was choosing confusion. You became quiet, but your silence was not weakness. It was discernment. And now the same men he tried to impress are asking him a question he cannot escape. What if you just pushed away the woman you were supposed to honor? The first symbol in this story is the devil reversed, not as fortune-telling, and not as a prediction of your future, but as a psychological picture of chains being broken. Upright, this image can represent bondage, unhealthy attachment, manipulation, fear, and repeating patterns. Reversed, it reflects the moment someone begins to see the chain and realizes they do not have to keep wearing it. That is what your response exposed. He expected the old cycle. He pulls away. You chase. He becomes uncertain. You over-explain. He withholds reassurance. You work harder to earn what should have been offered freely. But this time, the cycle stopped with you. Listen carefully. The test did not reveal how badly you wanted him. It revealed how deeply you had healed. 2 Timothy chapter 1 verse 7 says that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. And James chapter 1 verse 5 teaches that when we lack wisdom, we should ask God, who gives generously. You did not need to react from fear because discernment gave you another option. You could pause. You could observe. You could protect your peace. What happened next exposed the truth. The moment you refused to participate in the game, he was left alone with his own behavior. No distraction. No dramatic reaction to blame. No chase to feed his pride. Only the uncomfortable realization that you were not trapped by his attention. And that is where his test began testing him. And now he must decide whether he is willing to change, because the first change is not reaching out to you. The first change is telling himself the truth. Was it really a test, or was it protection? He wanted proof that you cared without having to admit how much he cared. He wanted reassurance without asking for it. He wanted devotion without vulnerability. And he wanted you to carry the emotional risk, so he would not have to face the possibility of rejection. That is not control. That is fear wearing armor. The next symbol in this story is the rising sun reversed. Again, not as fortune-telling and not as a guarantee of what he will do, but as a psychological image of light being blocked. The sun is still present. The truth is still present. But something has turned away from it. Pride can do that. Fear can do that. Immaturity can make a person stand in front of an open door and call it a trap simply because walking through it would require honesty. He may have told his boys that he was being strategic, that he needed to pull back and study your response, that a man should never reveal too much too soon, but privately he was watching for something else. Would you prove that he mattered? Would you fight through the distance and reassure him without being asked? Would you keep choosing him while he avoided choosing you clearly? Listen carefully. There is a difference between guarding your heart and hiding behind it. Proverbs chapter 4 verse 23 teaches us to guard the heart because everything we do flows from it. But guarding your heart does not mean manipulating another person into proving theirs. Wisdom protects the heart with truth. Fear protects it with walls, silence, and control. And now his wall has become a mirror. He can keep defending the test. He can tell himself you were too proud, too distant, or too quick to walk away. He can make your boundaries the problem, so he never has to examine his behavior. Or he can admit what the test exposed. He was afraid to ask for reassurance because the answer might not come. He was afraid to communicate directly because you might require accountability. He was afraid to be seen wanting you because wanting someone means they have the power to disappoint you. But vulnerability is not weakness. It is the price of real connection, and somewhere inside him, he knows that. His friends may have laughed when he first described the plan. They may have encouraged him to wait, stay cold, and let you come running. But the laughter is changing now. Because one man in that circle has started asking him an uncomfortable question. If it was only a test, why are you the one who cannot stop thinking about the result? That question changed the room. At first, his boys accepted the explanation because it sounded simple. He was testing you. He was staying in control. He was refusing to become too invested. And as long as everyone believed that story, he could keep pretending that your silence was part of his plan. But behavior has a way of speaking after words run out. They noticed how often he checked his phone without admitting who he hoped to hear from. They noticed how he brought up situations that sounded like you without saying your name. They noticed how quickly his energy changed whenever someone suggested that you might have moved on. He called it distance. His attention called it longing. He called it strategy. His defensiveness called it regret. The next symbol in this story is the Hermit reversed, not as fortune-telling and not as proof of what he will do next, but as a psychological image of isolation losing its purpose. Upright, the Hermit can represent reflection, solitude, and the search for wisdom. Reversed, it can reflect the moment solitude stops producing clarity and starts becoming avoidance. That is where he may be now. He pulled away to observe you, but now he is the one being observed. Not because his friends understand every detail, and not because they know what is inside his heart. But people can often recognize regret before the person carrying it is ready to name it. They can hear it in the repeated stories. They can see it in the unnecessary explanations. They can feel it when a person keeps insisting that something does not matter. And one of those men may be mature enough to recognize what the others missed. Maybe the real test was never whether you could handle his distance. Maybe the real issue was whether he could handle genuine intimacy. Because intimacy asks different questions. Can you communicate without hiding behind pride? Can you trust without creating confusion? Can you receive love without trying to control how it is proven? Can you remain honest when honesty makes you feel exposed? James chapter 3 verse 17 describes wisdom from above as pure, peace-loving, considerate, open to reason, and sincere. A connection guided by wisdom does not need secret tests. It can ask, it can listen, it can speak plainly. And now the image he created in front of his boys is beginning to crack. He wanted to appear detached, but they can see that he is affected. He wanted to appear certain, but his constant explanations reveal conflict. He wanted the story to prove that you cared more, but that is no longer the question. The question now is why your absence feels different from every other woman he once believed he could replace. Because what he misses is not simply your attention. It is the order your presence brought into places where he had learned to live with confusion. You did not just make him feel wanted. You made him think differently. You made him confront the way he communicated, the way he avoided, the way he expected closeness without responsibility. Your presence did not only comfort him, it challenged him. And that is why distraction cannot fully replace you. Another connection may give him attention. It may flatter him. It may allow him to remain unchanged. But attention is not alignment. Chemistry is not character. And being desired is not the same as being trusted with someone's heart. The next symbol in this story is the tower, not as fortune-telling and not as a prediction of sudden disaster, but as a psychological image of a structure that can no longer survive the truth. The tower represents what was built on unstable ground, pride, avoidance, false confidence. The belief that someone valuable will remain available no matter how carelessly they are treated. Your absence did not create the weakness in that structure. It revealed it. And this is where the phrase kingdom spouse must be understood carefully. It is not a magical label. It is not a guarantee that one specific person belongs to you. And it is not a reason to place your life on hold while waiting for someone else to mature. A kingdom-minded partner is someone whose presence calls you toward truth, toward responsibility, toward peace, purpose, and mature love. Not someone you possess, but someone you are prepared to honor. Not someone who feeds your ego, but someone whose character invites your character to rise. That is what he may be beginning to recognize. You were not asking him to become perfect. You were asking him to become honest. You were not demanding control. You were requiring clarity. You were not trying to own him. You were looking for evidence that he could steward something meaningful. Matthew chapter 7 teaches that a life built on rock can withstand pressure, while one built on unstable ground eventually reveals its foundation. Your standards created pressure, but they did not create the cracks. They exposed what was already there. He may meet people who distract him from that truth, but they cannot reproduce what your integrity awakened. They cannot become the mirror you were. They cannot erase the knowledge that peace was offered to him, and he answered it with a game. Listen carefully. Recognizing your value is not yet the same as becoming capable of honoring it, because regret can recognize value and still refuse responsibility. He may miss your presence. He may miss the reassurance you gave him. He may dislike the thought of someone else receiving the love he treated casually. He may even feel embarrassed now that the same men he tried to impress can see that his plan did not produce the outcome he expected. But none of that is transformation. Regret says, I do not like what this cost me. Repentance says, I understand what my behavior cost you. Regret wants access restored quickly. Repentance is willing to rebuild trust slowly. Missing you is one thing. Becoming safe for you is another. The next symbol in this story is the Knight of Swords reversed. Not as fortune-telling, and not as proof that he will return impulsively, but as a psychological image of movement without maturity. Upright, this knight can represent direct action, determination, and decisive communication. Reversed, it can reflect rushing forward without reflection, speaking before understanding, or trying to fix discomfort before accepting responsibility. That distinction matters. He could reach out because the silence is bothering him. He could make a dramatic confession because he fears losing his place in your life. He could say everything you once wanted to hear because urgency has finally replaced certainty. But emotional urgency is not evidence of emotional growth. Real change would require him to call the test what it was. Not strategy, not confusion, not bad timing, manipulation. It would require him to stop making his friends the audience for something that should have been handled privately. It would require direct communication without excuses, accountability without self-pity, and an apology that does not pressure you to make him feel better. Matthew chapter 3 verse 8 teaches that repentance should produce fruit. In other words, change must become visible, not through one intense conversation, but through a different pattern. Watch the pattern. Does he respect your boundaries when they inconvenience him? Does he remain honest when honesty costs him pride? Can he accept that forgiveness does not automatically restore the access he misused? Because apologizing to you may also require him to humble himself before the same men who watched him pretend not to care. He may have to admit that the game was not wisdom, it was fear, and that may be what frightens him most, not simply losing you, but realizing that the version of himself who played the game cannot follow you into the life you are building. And that new life is not built around proving that he lost you. It is built around no longer losing yourself. That is the unexpected part of this story. While he is confronting consequences, you are confronting freedom. And freedom can feel strange when you have spent so much time confusing emotional tension with connection. At first, peace may feel empty. Not because something is missing, but because chaos is no longer filling every space. You are not waiting for the next mixed signal. You are not rereading messages, searching for hidden meaning, or preparing yourself for another sudden withdrawal. Your nervous system is learning that love does not have to keep you guessing in order to feel significant. The next symbol in this story is the Knight of Cups reversed. Not as fortune-telling, and not as a prediction that someone will make an emotional offer, but as a psychological image of feelings that are not supported by stable action. Upright, this knight can represent emotional openness, romance, and sincere expression. Reversed, it can reflect beautiful words without direction, emotional intensity without consistency, or affection used to avoid accountability. And you are no longer building your life around potential. That does not make you cold. It makes you clear. People who benefited from your overfunctioning may call your healing detachment. They may say you changed because you stopped explaining everything, stopped carrying every conversation, and stopped making excuses for behavior that disturbed your peace. But you did not become indifferent. You stopped negotiating against your own wisdom. Your silence was not a tactic to make him chase you. It was not a performance designed to make him panic. It was what happened when you finally stepped out of the loop. No more presenting evidence in a courtroom where you were always expected to defend your worth. No more arguing with someone committed to misunderstanding what your boundaries meant. Romans chapter 12, verse 2 speaks about being transformed by the renewing of the mind. Sometimes that renewal looks like recognizing that familiar does not always mean healthy. Sometimes it means refusing to return to a pattern simply because it once felt powerful. So do not turn your healing into another test. Do not keep checking whether he noticed your absence. Do not measure your progress by whether he regrets what he did. The life you are building requires peace that remains peace even when no one is watching. Because the moment you stop needing his realization is often the moment his realization becomes impossible for him to ignore. And that response is not panic. It is responsibility. Because when he realizes that your healing is no longer centered on whether he returns, something shifts. You are not posting for a reaction. You are not sending indirect messages. You are not asking mutual friends what he said. You are not leaving emotional breadcrumbs so he can follow you without having to approach you honestly. The door is no longer being held open by your hope, and that can create internal disruption. He may become quieter. He may become suddenly urgent. He may speak about old memories. Mention what the two of you could have built, or react strongly to the possibility that someone else may recognize your value. He may even use spiritual language to describe what he once refused to handle with emotional maturity. But intensity is not always intention. The next symbol in this story is the Page of Pentacles reversed. Not as fortune-telling, and not as a prediction of what he will do, but as a psychological image of potential without disciplined follow-through. Upright, this page can represent learning, commitment, and the willingness to build something slowly. Reversed, it can reflect good intentions that remain undeveloped, promises without preparation, or someone wanting the reward without becoming responsible for the work. That is why discernment matters now. Is he reaching for you or reaching for relief? Is he honoring your boundaries or trying to outrun the consequences? Is he prepared to repair what was damaged, or only desperate to reconnect before the door closes completely? Listen carefully. Accessed increasing can make emotion increase. But increased emotion does not automatically mean increased capacity. 1 John chapter 4 teaches us not to believe every spirit, but to test what is presented. In practical terms, that means you do not have to reject every word. But you also do not have to surrender your wisdom because the words sound sincere. Watch the fruit. Does he become patient, or does he pressure you? Does he respect your pace or make his discomfort your emergency? Does he accept what his behavior created or use nostalgia to avoid naming it? Love is not self-seeking. It does not demand immediate relief at another person's expense. And this is where the difference becomes visible. A man who fears losing control will try to regain access quickly. A man who is ready to lead with integrity will respond in one very different way. He will take responsibility without forcing you to reward him for it. Not a grand declaration. Not a dramatic promise. Not a speech designed to make you forget what happened. The clearest evidence of readiness is voluntary accountability without pressure. He names what he did. He does not call manipulation a misunderstanding. He does not hide behind confusion. He does not blame his childhood, his past relationships, or the friends who encouraged him. Those things may explain his fear, but they do not excuse what he chose. He says, "I created uncertainty." He says, "I expected you to prove yourself while I avoided being clear." He says, "I understand why you stepped back." And then he allows your response to be yours. The sex symbol in this story is the 5 of Swords reversed. Not as fortune-telling, and not as a prediction of reconciliation, but as a psychological image of conflict losing its appeal. Upright, this card can represent winning at another person's expense, pride, tension, and the need to be right. Reversed, it can reflect the moment someone realizes that a victory built on damage is not a victory at all. That is the shift accountability requires. He stops trying to win the conversation. He starts trying to understand the harm. Not flowers without truth. Not promises without patience. Not spiritual language without spiritual fruit. Real repair asks different questions. What do you need in order to feel respected? What boundary did my behavior force you to create? What would consistency look like now? And am I willing to practice it even if reassurance is not immediately available? James chapter 5. Verse 16 teaches the importance of confessing faults and bringing what is hidden into the light. Confession is not simply admitting that something went wrong. It is becoming honest about your part in why it went wrong. And mature leadership does not look like control. It does not look like testing, watching, withdrawing, or creating anxiety to measure someone's loyalty. It looks like clarity, service, protection, responsibility, honesty, because covenant-level recognition creates covenant-level responsibility. If he truly believes you are someone he was meant to honor, then that realization cannot remain emotional. It must become behavioral. He must become willing to protect the connection from the very habits that once endangered it. But listen carefully. Even accountability does not guarantee restoration. Before any reunion can be called healing, one final test remains. And this time, the test belongs to neither of you. Reality. Time will test his consistency. Boundaries will test his respect. Truth will test his humility. And your peace will test whether you have truly stopped confusing potential with partnership. You do not need to create another test. You do not need to become distant on purpose, post something to provoke jealousy, or leave clues designed to measure his reaction. You do not need to manipulate the outcome to discover what is real. Reality will reveal it. The next symbol in this story is the King of Wands reversed. Not as fortune-telling, and not as a judgment of who he is destined to become, but as a psychological image of leadership distorted by ego. Upright, this king can represent vision, confidence, responsibility, and purposeful action. Reversed, it can reflect control without discipline, charisma without accountability, or someone wanting authority over a connection they have not learned how to care for. That is what time will expose. Can he remain consistent when the emotion settles? Can he respect your boundary when charm does not reopen the door? Can he tell the truth when the truth does not make him look powerful? Because he thought he was testing you, but character was testing him all along. When attention is removed, intention is revealed. When control is removed, character is revealed. When fantasy is removed, fruit is revealed. Matthew chapter 7 teaches that a tree is recognized by its fruit, not by what it promises to produce, not by how passionately it describes its potential, by what consistently grows from it. So remain honest, remain prayerful, remain observant, and remain willing to accept the answer reality gives you, even when it is not the answer your emotions once hoped for. He may choose humility. He may allow this experience to refine him. He may learn that leadership is not getting his way, but becoming trustworthy enough to carry responsibility. Or he may continue protecting his pride. And if he does, his inability to change may become the very protection you once prayed for without recognizing it. Listen carefully. Protection does not always arrive as a closed door that feels peaceful immediately. Sometimes it arrives as clarity that hurts before it heals. Sometimes God allows a pattern to become undeniable because uncertainty kept you attached to possibility. You do not have to decide his future. You only have to honor the truth in front of you, because either way, you did not lose the story. You discovered who you became when the cycle finally ended, and who you became matters more than the outcome you once believed you needed. He called it just a test. But a kingdom-minded relationship cannot be built through games. It cannot be built through public performance, hidden fear, or borrowed opinions from people who will not have to live with the consequences. It cannot be built by forcing one person to prove devotion while the other avoids responsibility. Love requires a stronger foundation. The final symbol in this story is the first quarter moon reversed, not as fortune-telling, and not as a prediction of whether this connection will return, but as a psychological image of hesitation at the moment action becomes necessary. Upright. The first quarter moon can represent decision, movement, and the courage to meet resistance. Reversed, it can reflect delay, inner conflict, or knowing what must change while still struggling to act. That choice belongs to him. He must decide whether he will remain behind the fear that created the test, or become honest enough to repair what fear damaged. He must decide whether recognizing you as a kingdom-minded partner will remain an emotional thought or become a responsibility he is willing to carry. You cannot make that decision for him. Your responsibility is different. Remain aligned with truth. Remain aligned with peace. Remain aligned with the standards that protected you when emotion wanted you to abandon yourself. Trust the wisdom God gave you when confusion tried to convince you that waiting in pain was proof of love. The chains were broken when you stopped chasing. The wall became a mirror when he was left alone with his behavior. And the unstable foundation was revealed when your boundaries applied pressure to what had never been built securely. Philippians chapter 1, verse 6 reminds us that God is faithful to complete the good work he begins. That does not promise a specific reunion. It promises that your growth is not wasted. Your healing is not unfinished, simply because someone else has not caught up with it. You were not rejected. You were revealed. You were not abandoned. You were redirected. You were not difficult to love. You became difficult to manipulate. Whether he rises into maturity or remains committed to pride is now his responsibility. You do not have to chase certainty. You do not have to force closure. You only have to keep walking in the truth that the cycle exposed. Because he thought the test would prove whether you were worthy of him. But it revealed whether he was ready to honor someone like you.